What is going on, everybody? It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS preview for Sunday at the Sanderson Farms. Going to touch on what to expect from the golf course, a couple of my top Draftkings plays here for the Sunday single round slate, and then we'll wrap it up at the end with the look at the Prize Picks golf board, which will hopefully drop here in the next 20 to 30 minutes here on stream. Give you a first reaction to that, and then throughout the whole process, go through any of your live questions. To this point, it's been a successful week. I still had plenty of Sam Burns, which to this point, those lineups aren't my top showing ones, but I have a couple that are in contention. So I guess a good way to start this live stream, just to introduce people as we're, letting some people funnel into the stream here, is we're in a pretty decent spot here. So this is in this $750 GBP. If you're playing 150 lineups, $5 per entry. And we're in 19th place right now. First place is 25K. We're 25 points behind them right now. So there's a few others I have in contention. Need a couple good rounds from guys like a Seabez. I mean, Chris Kirk or somebody like MJ Daffy. If they go out there and have like a 5 or 6 under par round, might be onto something. We'll have to see. We're in contention. There are a few other lineups that could also work their way up the board there. But it's a nice feeling, right? Going into the weekend, particularly the last round with at least live bullets giving you a sweat. And we've been on a pretty big heater of late. I mean, whether it's for the NFL or the golf side, every slate for the last like 2 to 3 weeks, I've either been in contention or getting pretty close to banking tournaments. So we've been, getting that bankroll, actually taking a little bit of money out of DFS over the last few weeks because we've had a surplus. So definitely a lot of good vibes here, and it'd be some really damn good vibes if we could take down that GBP. But enough talking about the first 3 rounds. Let's talk about how this course is playing and what to expect from the DFS side. First, a look at some of the top scores, which, Keegan Bradley, one of the picks that we talked up yesterday, shot 8 under par. I had some Mark Hubbard, particularly in some of my large field GPP lineups. You can see in that GPP lineup, I did have Mark Hubbard. SH Kim I played today. We talked up Taylor Montgomery, who went out there and had a bogey-free -5 round today. Seamus Power was in our player pool. Guys like an Adam Hadwin, even Scott Stallings, who I mentioned on stream there, all went off and had some of the best rounds of the day. So it's no surprise that I was able to go out there in 2.5x there, but no binking, right? That was the same thing there on Friday. I had a lot of really good lineups, but no great lineups. It seemed like every single combination had that one dud that went out there and ruined my day. And I'm sure that's a really common sentiment around a lot of you out there, right? DFS is difficult to even get the top 6 players right, but to get them in the same lineup is even more difficult, right? So sometimes it's going to happen, but when you have a decent player pool, you're going to go out there and be able to make some profit. So you like to see that. On Prize Picks, we went 5, 3, and 1 today. So that's not ideal. It's a little bit over a 60% hit rate. So, it's not drastic or anything. Went right around a 1.5x there. If Sepp Straka would have been any of the birdie putts over his last 4, actually 6 holes where he had, I believe, less than 30 feet was the metric for all of those putts, we would have hit for right around like 2.5, 2.7x, something in that range. But it's fine, right? We profited on the day. We got a little bit more units going into Sunday. So no complaints for me. The golf course played easier, right? We talked about a scoring average. I expected it to be at least 1.5 strokes under par. It played a lot closer to the historical average, which is usually right around 2 strokes under par, 1.85. I think the added difficulty this year has to do with the speed of the greens. I mean, they've been talking about it pretty much nonstop on the broadcast that they're running at 14.5s on the stimp meter. So that's definitely going to add difficulty to any golf course. I mean, major championships, they're usually running at like 13.5. 14 if they're running them real crispy out there. These are 14.5, right? So that's a factor that these players aren't used to. When you're short-sighted, you've seen pretty much players at best putting it to like 10 to 15 feet. And they're still scoring here, right? Because it's a straightforward golf course, but it's a lot more about putting this week than any other tournament at the Sanderson Farms, because you have to make those 10 to 15 footers. And you've seen that. Guys like Emiliano Grillo, for example, because he was only hitting shots to like that 6 to 10 foot range all day, I believe he missed it was like 6 or 7 birdies within 15 feet. He's known for being an atrocious putter, and you're going to see a lot of players that are ball striking type of specialists. I think maybe struggle this year because of the green speed. So that's something that I've noticed over the first 3 rounds and that I wanted to relay to some of you. You're looking at, I mean, look at the top of the leaderboard. It speaks for itself. Mark Hubbard, putting specialist. We know that. Mackenzie Hughes, one of the best putters on the PGA Tour. Sepp Straka has been rolling the ball beautifully this week. Garrick Higgo is definitely a short game sort of player. The only real like ball striking specialists, right, are like a Keegan Bradley and Emiliano Grillo, who to this point, their ball striking floors are why they're in the positions that they are. So I don't know if they can have that spike round. I mean, you saw it from Keegan today. He gained over 3.5 strokes putting. That's why he's in contention. The only one that hasn't really done it with the putter is Emiliano Grillo. So if you're going to take a shot on any of these ball striking specialist sort of players, I would probably do it on Grillo because Keegan had that round today. He's not going to gain 3.5 strokes putting very often on the PGA Tour. In fact, it's probably only going to happen maybe once or twice a year for somebody like Keegan in a single round. So I don't expect that to happen once again. But hey, maybe Emiliano Grillo is that sort of player. Outside of that, all of these players are good putters. S.H. Kim is one of the best putters in the world for everything that I've heard. We talked about that at the Fortnite. He obviously wasn't the best there with the flat stick, but this week you're really seeing what he's made of. He's making pretty much all those 25 to 30 footers. Burmeister's known on the DP World Tour as one of the best putters over there. Also, pretty solid off the tee player too. So I think he's got a really good combination for a lot of the American golf courses. And if he goes out there and he's posting top 10s out there, maybe he starts playing over here a little bit more than the DP World Tour side because, I mean, he's got an American style game, right? Long off the tee, really good putter. I think that he can make himself a home over here. So you like to see that. A few of the other guys, right? Like Davis Radley, you're starting to get a few more ball strikers when you get down to here, like the 15th, the 20th place range. But look at the top of the board, right? It speaks for itself. You know, the Hughes, the Hubbards of the world are the ones that are consistently going out there and posting these 4 to 5 under rounds. And just in terms of guys that made the cut, I mean, especially towards the bottom of the board, you have a lot of putting first sort of players, a lot of players that aren't very long off the tee. Like Chris Kirks of the world, right? Adam Long, who, despite the last name being long, is not very long off the tee. All of those sort of players are just not the best ball strikers, right? They don't have the best ball striking floor. And I know they're in like 40th, 50th place, right? But that's a pretty solid performance for a lot of those sort of players and their sort of pedigree. It's definitely a little bit of a putting fest, right? As a John Rahm calling an effing putting fest out there. So I wanted to point that out. Golf course should play to a similar level of difficulty because when we look at the weather over here for Sunday, low winds in the morning, much like what we saw for Saturday in that 5 to 7 mile an hour range. When it comes to your sustained winds, the wind gusts top off at 12 to 15 miles an hour over the middle part to end of the day. So the guys that'll be teeing off in the lead will be dealing with 14 to 15 mile an hour wind gusts, but that was, a little bit higher than what they had today. It was closer to 10 to 14 miles an hour for what you saw here on Saturday, but that's not a drastic difference. The morning conditions are actually even more benign than what we saw here for Saturday. So when we get to the strategy section, which we're going to do here in actually about 30 seconds here, you're going to see that the guys that are in this morning wave that today had much easier conditions than the guys in the afternoon are guys that we probably want to go after. So if you split this by wave, you can see that the scores in the afternoon were easier than the morning, but that's not reflective of the course conditions. In the morning, they were a lot more receptive. The ball was still flying plenty of ways. It's just that the better players in the field, the ones that have more on the line and are going to be a little bit more focused than the rest of the field, are the ones playing in the afternoon wave, right? So when you get like a 0.1 shot difference between the two waves, you can tell that it's either going to be a straight up, right, where it's even between the two waves, or actually maybe even the morning was slightly easier. So, if we sort this by the best scores today, just to give you an idea, right, Hubbard, of course, was teeing off later in the afternoon, but Keegan Bradley went early off this morning. S.H. Kim was an early tee time. Even Taylor Montgomery was towards the middle to early part of the day, as opposed to guys like a Mark Hubbard, even Seamus Power, Hadman, all these sort of players. Outside of Mark Hubbard, I mean, your next ceiling performance is what? Like somebody like a Mackenzie Hughes down here that shot -4 for somebody like a Stallings or a Garrick Higgo. It's not like you couldn't get to that ceiling, but these, -8, -6, -5 sort of rounds that you saw from a handful of players that we actually took in our poll today were in that morning wave. So, this 0.1 shot difference where it's actually easier in the afternoon is a little bit misleading, right? So that's why we have to look at the top end scores to see where people were actually getting to optimal lineup sort of plays, right? Because, in general, sure, you could have played the afternoon wave today, and if you're playing a cash or a 2 to 3 max sort of tournament, may have been cashed a little bit more. But if you're trying to win the GPPs, right, you had to have Keegan Bradley, and he was a morning tee time. And if you only played the quote unquote 0.1 shot easier wave, you wouldn't have never gotten access to it, right? So I think that's an important thing to always look at there. But in general, not a huge difference between the two waves. I'm definitely siding towards the morning here, which we'll talk about here in a second. It's not just that the conditions should be easier in the morning, but also a lot to do with game theory. So let's head over there. Sway McThunder down there, he says he hit on underdog today. You love to see that. I saw you over there last time. I was doing a few of those best ball drafts, and I think you were actually in a couple with me. So yeah, you seem to like it over there. And honestly, I don't play there as much as I should. It's been a really good experience for me too. I've won a lot more than I've lost. I've never had to deposit other than my initial deposit. And I can't say that about every site out there, right? There's time to time I got to go out there and add a little bit of bankroll there, particularly for some of the smaller sites. Like when I was playing Thrive, that sort of thing. Like, I'm not going to keep a massive bankroll on some of the side sites that I'm playing. But yeah, maybe I got to make underdog more of one of these major sites that I'm playing. I definitely have had a good experience so far. Let's talk through a few of my top plays here. But before we do, we're going to talk from a top level perspective about what to expect from a Sunday Showdown. So if you've never played Sunday Showdown, it's a little bit different than Thursday through Saturday Showdown, where placement points aren't a part of the picture. It's all about your raw score on the day. You get points for streaks, you get points for bogey-free rounds, much like you would for a 4-round contest, except that your points for everything are a little bit boosted, right? You get, like 5 points for a birdie rather than whatever is like 2.5, 3 there for a 4-round contest. So you're getting scores closer to like 260 to 350 to take home one of those sort of contests. For Sunday Showdown, you have all of that same sort of scoring, except you also add in placement points. So first place is going to get 12 points. I believe second is 8, so on and so forth, down to 0.5 for a lot of the players that are in, I believe, the 30th to 50th place range. So, obviously, if you're not doing anything in terms of the leaderboard, you're only going to get 0.5 points. It's pretty much irrelevant. And that's for a majority of the field, right? The points are going to be irrelevant. And outside of the guy that's finishing in first, that's getting 12 points, which, if you're doing it in terms of birdies, is the equivalent of 2 birdies out there in terms of your production, it's not that big a deal, right? 8 points to second, sure, that's important. And sure, the guys that finish in first and second are likely going to be in the optimal lineup anyways. But if you're trying to target players, hoping that they finish in like 5th or 6th place, you're doing so for no reason. They're points that really don't mean anything. If you're looking to win a large field GPP, it is a lot more about your raw score tomorrow than it is what I would call the fake placement points that a lot of people overvalue. Sometimes they matter. Now, there are situations where those placement points become a huge part of the system, namely when somebody has a massive lead, which in this case, right, Mark Hubbard's at 15 under, you have 14 under with Mackenzie Hughes. That's a 1-shot lead. That is certainly not the case. Or when you have an extremely difficult golf course, when somebody has that huge lead, you could argue that locking in those 12 placement points can mean a little bit more than it would otherwise when somebody only has a 1-shot lead. But also on a difficult golf course, those 12 points might be a much larger percentage of your actual score than what it is on a birdie fest, like what we have here, right? It was a 1.8 shot under par average. Might be at least that tomorrow, maybe like 1.7 to 2 under par, something in that range is what I would expect from the golf course. It's no US Open. You're going to be looking at least 4/5 of your score coming from your actual scoring out there, even if you finish in first place. So if you're trying to go and take some of the guys at the top of the board, you're not going to be unique. They're going to be extremely highly owned. Mark Hubbard, Sepp Straka, Scott Stallings, Mackenzie Hughes, Garrick Higo, all of those sort of players that are lining up there in the top 5 are going to be your top 5 in ownership. So you have to keep that in mind when you're playing these large field tournaments. It's a much better strategy to go after some of the guys in the morning, because not only do they have advantageous conditions, like you saw today with all of those ceiling performances from guys that were teeing off in the first half of the day, but you also get lower ownership. You typically get a lower price too. So it's really not just like a double folded thing. It's really like 3 or 4 different advantages you get from taking a lower owned, lower priced, easier to leverage sort of situation in the morning wave. And that's really what I'm going after here. Now, with that in mind, there are still players, at least towards the middle or top of the leaderboard, that I'm going to consider taking, but it's not going to be the mega chalk options, right? So to give you an example, we're going to talk about Davis Riley, the play specifically here in a minute, but what he's -9. That's, I believe, in the top 10 at this point in the tournament, or at least close to it. He's within striking distance of the top 5. Now, it's more of his game. It's more of his ability to get to something like a 6 or 7 under par round that I care about. But if he does so at -9, he also could win this golf tournament, right? And get you those 12 placement points. The thing that makes him a really good play here is that he's not being owned like some of the other players, right? Like Scott Stallings has a solid 5 to 7% edge in terms of ownership there. If you go down further, guys like Mark Hubbard are almost 10% higher owned than somebody like a Davis Riley. So you're getting a little bit of a value there. And I think he's just a much better player than some of those other options. So that's the idea when it comes to Sunday Showdown. Maybe take 2, 3 players at the very most that are up there in the top 10 to top 15 of the tournament. And then you want to take at least 3, maybe even 4 players that are going off in the morning, right? That are going to be low owned, that aren't going to be getting a ton of attention, and that can bring that top end ceiling type of performance to the table. Because when we look at optimal lineups, particularly over about the last 3 to 4 months, this has been a trend, not only for Showdown, but also for 4-round contests, is you've had 1, 2, sometimes 3 pieces of chalk that are hitting on a given week, and then 3 of those low owned pivots are in the optimal lineup. So people that are going out there and selectively picking pieces of chalk that are going to hit, and then obviously going out there still trying to find some of those diamonds in the rough that are going to hit, are the ones that have been binking tournaments. And honestly, you know how I said I'm on a heater? I think that's why, because that's my strategy, right? If you've been here for a while, you know that I hate chalk, but I'm definitely one to recognize that there are pieces of chalk that are good chalk. Right, this week, for example, Sam Burns is playing the worst golf that he could have possibly played this week. Like, he's just atrocious. He made a few putts today for once, which was great, but the ball striking was now gone, right? He's really, really rusty out there, and he's still in like 30th place. Made the cut, right? He's not killing your lineups, particularly because, I mean, you have to have some of those 9K options that are going off, like a Montgomery, Seabez, some of the other guys, like a Sepp Straka, right, in the 8K range that are going off this week. I mean, you could still play all of those guys with a Sam Burns lineup, right? So I even have a lot of those sort of lineups with Sam Burns, like in the top 200 of the GPP right now, right? So there's pieces of chalk you can get away with, right? Taylor Montgomery was relatively high owned going into the week. He's a piece of good chalk that's essentially paying off at this point. But we also played guys like a Sepp Straka, right? I talked about him as one of my sleeper picks, one of the super low owned plays that I was getting to. You got to be able to mix in both ends of the spectrum. So that would be the one thing that I would say to take away from this, right? Is that we're always looking to pivot away from chalk, but we always have to look at those players, especially probably even a little bit extra, right? You have to put in a little bit of extra effort in analyzing the pieces of chalk because they are just such big decision points when it comes to the slate. So that was a lot there. I'm sorry, boys. Again, I wanted to go over all of that. Alex Smith says, do I build rosters you want with any of the players I have marked as a yes? That's the idea. I mean, you don't have to play my player pool. The idea there is to give you my player pool, right? Who I'm playing. That doesn't mean you have to tail it. Doesn't mean you have to play those same sort of players. It's more the types of players that I'm getting to, right? So I'm sure you have the spreadsheet up right now on your end. You can see that I'm getting to guys that are in general towards the bottom of the leaderboard, that are playing in the morning and that are lower owned than some of their peers, right? So that idea alone, I mean, obviously the players, I mean, it'll give you an idea of some of the players that you can target yourself that are in that same sort of situation. But that's the idea. Getting the combination right is the hard part. I mean, that's the one thing I'll say about PGA DFS is, like, even today I had the nuts in terms of my player pool, but I didn't have them all in the same lineup. So this is one thing to having a really good player pool. It's another thing going out there and executing it. You really have to be leveraged significantly to the field on all of those top 6 to 10 optimal plays in the player pool to have a shot to go out there and big tournaments. It's tough, that's for sure. But if you're doing the right things, you should be able to profit on most slates, particularly for Showdown. There's a huge edge out there. Let's talk through some of the actual plays that I'm getting to, though. So Davis Riley, I promised we'd talk about him. He's a hometown kid. I don't know if many people talked about it going into the week, but he is from, I believe, less than an hour away from Jackson, Mississippi. He's 10,200. He's a little bit expensive, and that's going to keep his ownership relatively low. I mean, most people are going to try and get to Scott Stallings. I imagine that Taylor Montgomery, who we played today, had that bogey free round, probably gets some attention too. He's playing exactly like I expected him to. He's not carrying himself with the putter, gaining significantly both off the tee and on approach. So I like to see that from Taylor there at 10,300. But Davis Riley is the one that I mostly want to get to here because he's got the top end putting upside. Like we know Bermuda grass is Davis Riley's thing. And to this point, the ball striking has been unbelievable. He had multiple of those 7 to 10 footers today that he was missing just on the edge, burning it. He had some real negative self-talk. I mean, he was kind of talking himself down a little bit too much for my liking out there. And I know if I ever get like that on a golf course, it happens to everybody, right? You're going to have instances that you regret when it comes to, things that you say to yourself in your head. And it impacts your play. It definitely impacts my play, especially when that same thing happens. So maybe that happened with Riley, right? He got on the wrong side of a few breaks early when it came to the putts, and it bled throughout the rest of the round. But he's, in general, one of the better putters that we have on tour. And if anybody's going to turn it around, I would expect Davis Riley to do so. So I like him there. I think he's going to be at least moderately owned, right? 22%. It's not like he's a pivot. It's not like we're talking about a single-digit owned player there. But I think it's fair, and it's something that I am going to get leverage on. Next up, we've got Christian Bazain Hoot. He's $9,500. I love the fact that he's a top-end putter. Tomorrow, I think it's going to be a putting fest. I talked when we were going through the golf course that this is a lot more of a putting fest this year because of how fast the greens are. You're getting a lot of extra rollout on some of the chip shots that you're hitting, and even your iron shots. You have to account for quite a bit of run out, even with receptive greens. That's just how fast they are. Guys like Bazain Hoot that are a lot more likely to make those 15 to 20 footers are the types of guys that I'm kind of trying to get to, right? Particularly when he's -8, he's only going to be 18% owned, which again, it's not like he's a low owned pivot play, but he's also not a piece of chalk like a Scott Stallings, for example. And given that I like his skill set a lot more than a Scott Stallings for tomorrow, I think he's head and shoulders the better play there. And at this point, Scott Stallings is going to start with like 6 placement points. I believe Bazain Hoot's probably going to start with like 2. If Bazain Hoot goes out there and makes one more birdie than Scott Stallings, he accounts for that difference plus some, right? He's able to outscore him tomorrow, right? So, don't look at this -12 versus -8 score and think that it's all that big a deal, because in reality, it's really next to nothing, particularly when it comes to some of the large field tournaments. Next player I want to talk about is Sepp Straka at 9,100. He played him today. He had a decent round, not a great round. Only had 4 birdies, I believe, 1 bogey on the day, shot 3 under par. He's just chugging along. His ball striking has been there. He was hitting plenty of fairways. The iron play, he was hitting it to 15 to 20 feet all day, just couldn't buy one of those longer putts. All of his birdies, I believe, were within 10 feet. And one of them may have been a little bit of a longer putt, but just could not buy anything, right? Had nothing go his way out there. You've seen that through the first 2 days too. It's been a lot of just ball striking from a Sepp Straka, and he's eventually going to luck sack himself into at least a birdie, maybe even 2 birdies out there in a round. And if he does so, given the floor that we've seen over the first 3 rounds, you got to love him at $9,100. Sepp Straka, we've seen this in the past. He's one of those players that gets on a roll and usually doesn't let it go. For whatever reason, he's just a streaky mofo who, when you catch him on the right week, is going to win you a lot of money. And this is one of those weeks where I played 35% in my player pool. So it's a little bit selfish. He's in a lot of my top lineups, but I think he's one of the few pieces of chalk. Like, he's 24% owned. He's significantly higher owned than a Christian Bazain Hoot. Also, a Davis Riley up there at 22%. He actually may even come in closer to like 25, 26%. Maybe even 30% in some of the higher dollar single entries or cash contests, right? He's going to be even more popular in those sort of builds. But I will be getting leverage there because I honestly think he might win this golf tournament, right? I said that yesterday. I thought he'd get himself into contention. He's definitely done so over the first few rounds. Just has to get the job done. So hopefully, just like he did at the Honda Classic, he's able to go out there and do so. Next pick up here is a super sneaky one. So a few of the top picks have been like 18 to 25%. You got single digit, 4.6% when it comes to ownership here on Adam Svensson. It's because he's overpriced, right? He's -3. He's like the only guy towards the bottom of the leaderboard that's in this 8K range. Everyone else is like at least -7, -6, or like -5, right? At the very least, like somebody like a Chris Kirk. Then you have Adam Svensson. He played today alongside, I believe, Sam Burns, who also struggled. So there was some negative mojo going there. So maybe they were rubbing off on each other. I kind of blame Adam Svensson for the round that Sam Burns had today, only shooting 1 under par. But if there's anybody that can be extremely volatile, go out there, shoot over par one day, go out there the next day, shoot someone like 5 or 6 under, it's Adam Svensson. We've seen it before. He's gone out there on Thursdays, played himself seemingly out of the golf tournament, shooting like 3-4 over par. And then on Friday, shoots like 5 or 6 under to make the cut on the number. He's done it a handful of times already in just his 1 year on the PGA Tour. And at $8,700, because he's overpriced, no one wants to play him. He's going to be super low owned. He's going to be that one pivot play in the 8K range that you can get to, that if he goes out there and he has that ceiling performance, right, which is going to be like 6-7 birdies tomorrow, you're going to differentiate yourself from 95% of the field. It's going to be a beautiful piece of leverage to have. So it's just something that I can't pass up given how volatile, how much fantasy, his scoring propensity, to go out there and have these ceiling performances. He does it a lot more often than a lot of other players out there. Just somebody I have to get to. Makes a lot of sense. Next up, we've got Dean Burmeister, so $8,100. I talked about how I like his putting upside, also the fact that he gains a bunch of strokes off the tee. So I'll definitely be getting to him as well at 18.4%. He's minus 10, so he's done quite a bit of scoring to this point. I believe is in the top 10 to 15 at this stage of the golf tournament. But I think he's just a better player than a lot of his peers. Like when you compare him to an Andrew Putnam, he's by far the better player. And even when you compare him to guys up here like a Hadwin, Seamus Power, I'd argue that from a world ranking perspective, right, they're comparable, like at least comparable. They're in the same range there. But long term, Burmeister is probably a lot higher upside player than those other guys. So I like the trajectory. I like what we're seeing from the form there. And even though on the DP World Tour, he had kind of struggled over the last few months, he's clearly playing well this week, right? So I'm willing to forgive and forget there. I didn't plan for 4-round contests because I was worried about some of that form that we saw overseas. But he's definitely put all of that to rest. He looks like an absolute killer right now. This top of the 7K range is a bit of a dead zone to me. If you're looking for leverage, it's a great place to look, though. Guys like a Justin Lauer, Will Gordon, Luke List are going to be nearly unowned. So if you're looking for a place to get different from the field, especially if you're taking a few pieces of chalk, I think that's a great place to live. Down here, it's a little bit more chalky in this Nick Taylor, Rogers, especially Mackenzie Hughes, right? He's going to be one of the highest owned players on the slate. I can just tell you, there is no shot I am playing Mackenzie Hughes, right? You could have probably figured that out from some of the strategy that we were talking through. But players like a Patrick Rogers, Nick Taylor, I'm a little bit more willing to get to. They'll be chalky, but it's not like they're going to be mega chalk like a Mackenzie Hughes. Just the guys that are at the top of the leaderboard that are getting credit for those placement points that really don't mean all that much when it comes to a birdie fest like we have here, just are going to be clear spots that I stay away from. You have Marty Dow here, $7,700. He's been playing some solid golf. Aaron Rye made 8 birdies today. So if you just looked at his outright score of -2, you probably thought he struggled from a fantasy perspective, but he put up a ton of points, right? He made 8 birdies on the day. That's really what you're looking for from the Showdown format. The 6 bogeys he had weren't ideal, right? It would have been a lot better if he went out there, had 8 birdies and no bogeys. Then he would have posted like 60, 70 fantasy points. But you got to like what you're seeing from the putter. He's been aggressive. He knows his position on the leaderboard, he essentially has nothing to lose at this point. So he's -4. I think you get back there. I think it makes sense. MJ Daffy, an aggressive player who started off really rough today, was, I believe, 2 or 3 over par on his front 9, but ended up a couple under par by the end. So really battled out there, and he's a rookie. So he's got to go out there and assert himself, get some of those points for the reshuffle that's coming up, I believe, in a month and a half, so that he can get a few more starts on tour this year. And again, like springboard his career going forward. So $7,400 Daffy, he definitely has the sort of motivation that I'm looking for in one of the 7K guys. I like Robbie Shelley. He's just a better player than his peers. He looked really good on the Korn Ferry Tour. Moving down a little bit further, Brandon Wu played well. Austin Smotherman just has not had a ceiling round to this point, but just continues to generate under par round after under par round. And in the past, we've seen him kind of do that, right? Just kind of spin his wheels from round to round, but still make cuts, right? He's a really high floor player because of the ball striking that he brings to the table. But when he can start to get a few putts to drop is when he goes out there and he really shoots something like 6 to 7 under. So I like Austin Smotherman. Dylan Fratelli at $7,000 is a player that I'm getting to. He's one of the better putters in this field and generally in the world. Bermuda isn't his favorite surface, but he's in the picture there. He's -8, right? If we get a 7 or an 8 under par round, he can get himself into that top 5 to top 10 situation, which again, the placement points, I'm not really all that worried about, But, obviously the birdie production there is what's really driving my interest. And I think he's going to be one of the lower owned guys, right? Like if you look at some of the pieces of chalk, up here in the middle 7K range, it's a little bit more extreme. Like Turan's going to get ownership. We already talked about Hughes, but even like Nick Taylor and Rogers are going to get something like 7 to 10%. Down here, a few of these guys like a Dylan Fratelli, right? Look, I have him at 5%, right? So when you get to the bottom of the 7K range, some of the guys that are like sniffing the middle of the board are just getting a little bit less attention than the guys at the middle or even top of the 7K range, just because everyone wants to spend their salary. And because the salaries are so soft when it comes to your round 4 showdown pricing, you don't have to play a ton of guys towards the bottom of the 7K range. You don't even have to play that many guys in the 6K range at all. And you can still spend up for a lot of the options that you're trying to get to. So just inevitably, right, built in because of that, a lot of the guys down here are lower owned as a result. We talked about Dylan Fratelli. I don't know if you guys here are like a Neesmith. He's a good ball striker. John Ha, I'd go right back there. Right, we talked him up yesterday. He shot -2 today. So kind of similar to an Aaron Rye. It's not like he had that ceiling round, but it's still playing some solid golf. Let's catch up on chat, see what's going on. Mark says, "Hey Luke, where is everybody? You need help for tomorrow." I'm here, dude. We're here. There's people down in chat. We're talking through it. What's going on, CJ? Hopefully you're doing well. Sway McThunder says you love the Svensson call. Yeah, I'm always looking for those low-end pivots. CJ says Justin Suh is hot garbage. Yeah, I guess you really don't like Justin Suh. Yeah, I haven't played him, so I don't have this huge vendetta against the guy. But I guess you must have had too much exposure there because you're not treating him very good. But hey, John Ha, right? Not to be confused with Justin Suh, right? Suh and Ha. Maybe you get the Justin for John Ha here, right? Gosh, now I'm mixing up the names, right? But either way, I think you want to get to this guy here at -4. Let's go down a little bit further. Vince Whaley had a horrible day today. So if you're looking for a low-owned play that nobody's going to get to, Vince Whaley is definitely not going to get a lot of ownership. And he's a volatile mofo. He's definitely capable of going out there and having a good round. Down here, Brian Stewart, $6,400. It pains me to say it when I'm playing him. I absolutely hate the guy. But if I think it's going to be a putting contest, then I have to play Brian Stewart. He's solid on Bermuda. It's a golf course that you're getting some extra rollout on in the fairway, and he hits a ton of fairways. It's kind of just catered for him to have a good golf tournament here. He's going to be low owned, teeing off at least in the first half of the day, 3.2% in terms of his projected ownership. I'm done talking about him. I hate talking about the guy. He's my probably least favorite player in the world, but yes, I'll be getting to him from the Showdown format. And yeah, that makes me have to drink it. I haven't even had any of my bourbon to this point, but if I start talking about Brian Stewart, guys, I got to get some alcohol on me. I can't stand it. I hate the play, but I have to get to it because it makes sense. Had that on standby for when we got to the Brian Stewart stage here. Let's go down a little bit further, though. Garrick Higo, going to be a piece of chalk that you have to make a decision on. I have him right now right around 20% owned. Actually, I think even a little bit higher than that. When it came to my last set of ownership, he's $6,200. I played him going into the week in my 4-round contest. He has the upside. He's still super cheap, but he's also an extremely volatile player that you can't count on, right? So if he's being owned in 20% of lineups, that's implying that you're going to have to play him in like 40 to 45% of your lineups, and he has nowhere near that sort of optimal rate. Remember, this is a birdie fest. These placement points, for 3rd through 10th place essentially mean nothing. So unless he goes out there and he shoots like 5 to 6 under par once again, he's probably not going to be the sort of player that you're looking for. And he's being owned by 20% of the field, right? So a good way to just differentiate yourself is to not play Garrett Higo, right? Don't play 40 to 50% of them. And scattershot. I mean, you could play 10 guys down here if you wanted to. Now, I'm not doing so, right? I'm being a little bit more concentrated about it. I'm playing, I believe, on last count, I think it was like 4 guys under $6,500, something like that. One of them is Brian Stewart, and the one of them down here is Dylan Wu. So kind of similar to a Higo, he's kind of that similar level player where he's extremely inconsistent. He's not going to go out there and make very many cuts, but he's a talented guy, clearly, right? PGA Tour card. We know that with Dylan Wu. And we've even seen him be first-round leader, or at least sniff first-round leader a few times there last season. So $6,000, he's -5, so you're not worrying about placement points at this point, but 0.6% owned, right? For somebody at the minimum who's not like some guy we've never seen before, right? Like a Trevor Cohn, Chris Stroud, who's dog shit, Tano Goya. Like, there's guys down here that like I'd have no business even thinking about playing, right? But then you have Dylan Wu, who's like a PGA Tour player. He's like actually half decent. Those are the sort of guys that I'm getting to. Like Scott Piercy, another PGA Tour regular that I'd be comfortable playing under that sort of price tag. Peter Manotti at $6,600. We talked about Vince Whaley already. Just there are these PGA Tour regulars down here, especially the volatile ones like a Whaley, a Malnati, for example, at $6,600 that aren't getting a ton of ownership that you can play, again, like a handful of them, at least five, probably closer to 7 or 8 of them in replacement of playing somebody like a Garrick Higo. So that's why I'm so adamant about the game theory side of Sunday Showdown here, because making those sort of decisions is how you win long term. Because if you add up all of the optimal percentages of those players and compare it to a Garrick Higo, I'd argue that it probably has at least 4 to 5 times more optimal rate by going to the 5 to 7 players rather than just going to, a super high owned Garrick Higo. So that's always my thought process. And, taking this small example and making it more of a macro perspective, you can think about that way with the entire slate, right? So up top, rather than taking some of the chalky guys like Mackenzie Hughes, right? Mark Hubbard, that's going to be super chalky. Let's think Scott Stallings there at -12. Few of those just high owned, like 25 to 30% owned plays that you're going to have to invest 2/3 of your lineups into. You can take all of the pivots, right? You can take the Davis Rallies of the world, the Christian Bazain Hoots. You can also take a Sepp Straka, right? Who's still relatively high owned and have room left over to play other guys up here. And it's not just these 3 that I'm playing, right? Just for full disclosure, there's like, I believe at least 3 or 4 other guys here above $8,800 that I'm playing here for tomorrow's slate. So keep in mind, right, I don't have all of my picks on here. For access to all of them, they are on my Patreon page. That is where you get all of the ownership, all of the players that I'm getting to. By fading the guys that are 30 to 35% owned, we just open up a lot more of the optimal percentages. And if you're playing this for the long game, right, not just trying to go out there and win tomorrow, you're trying to be a long-term winner when it comes to PGA DFS. That's one of the first steps, is understanding optimal rates and targeting for the long game, right? Rather than going for the long or I should say for the short-term success. Let's go ahead and hop over to Draftkings, talk through some of the lineups that we're building here. So let's go ahead and share our screen, go over here to Draftkings, see what's going on. We've got Nick Marsh who says, yeah, Brian Stewart week. Yeah, dude, I don't like him. And I don't know if you're expecting that with Brian Stewart, but yeah, I wasn't expecting to play him either. But, I had that realization really this morning about the golf course being so putting heavy because of how fast they were moving. I was watching the shot trackers, and anytime somebody was short-sided, like even the best short game players in the field were hitting it to like 8 to 10 feet. And most of them were missing, right? Because an 8 to 10 footer is like a 50-50 prospect at best. And even if you're going uphill, like a lot of those comebackers will be, it's still a tough putt to make. And just as I saw more of these players miss and miss and miss, I was like, oh, wow, well, the guys that are keeping their rounds alive are making all of those putts. They're putting first players. So, yeah, it pains me to say, but I have to play them. It makes too much sense. You saw your first round. Yeah, I saw you played Brian Stewart this week. So you understand. All right, what we're going to do here is talk through a large field GPP build. So we're just going to make one lineup here, do this a little bit quickly, talk through a thought process if you're going through a hand build, that sort of thing. When I'm starting lineups, Davis Rally is a good place to start, but you could start in this 9K range, right? If you wanted to take a Bazain Hoot here, you could start there. Sepp Straka, I love. We talked about him. Svensson. You could just really take a lot of these low-owned, solid plays here. I mean, I talked about the top of the 7K range being a spot of low ownership. I mean, Luke List, you don't love the fact that he's even par, had such a bad round today, but we've seen him turn it around before. You still have $7,400 remaining per player. I mean, you could put Marty Dow in there if you wanted to, still have $7,100. Now, we're not allowed to click in the last player here, but there's plenty of options, especially here at $7,000. One of them that we talked about, $7,100 Smotherman is a great option to round out that sort of lineup. This is going to be unique because it's avoiding a lot of the mega chalk, right? So if you want to get an idea for the mega chalk, just sort this by score here. And I had to scroll up there a little bit. My bad. Right, like Hubbard, Hughes, Stallings, Higo, Bradley, all of these sort of players are the ones that are going to be super high end. And I don't think you have to avoid all of them, right? I'm still playing Sepp Straka in that lineup. I'd be willing to take maybe 1-2 at a max of the guys that are here, 11 under par or better. But if you're taking 3 or 4 of them in the same lineup, good luck being unique. And they have pretty much the same chance of being in the optimal lineup as every other player in the field. But now if you're playing cash, we're going to go through a cash build here just to show you the flip side of it. You might want to consider some of these players, particularly the value options. So, like a Mackenzie Hughes, he's a much bigger priority for me in cash than he is for these large field GPPs because he's also cheap, right? So you're getting, I don't know, like 5 to 8 points built in with Mackenzie Hughes. I guess 12 if he ends up winning the golf tournament. And in cash, that means a lot more than the large field GPPs. So I like him at 7,700. I guess if you wanted to take Higo, he'd be in that same sort of scenario. But now that you're left at 9 grand, I don't think you have to take these, guys like a Hubbard and Stallings at the top of the board. So if we were to sort this by salary and cash, I still like getting Sam Burns. I think he's a great cash play tomorrow. Bazain Hoot at 9,500. He's a great cash play in the 8K range here. I mean, Power is probably a really good guy to take in cash. You can just maybe take a few of the chalky value picks and then mix in just the best players in the field, right? So they don't even have to be high owned, right? Sam Burns is still going to be high owned. Bazain Hoot and Power are still going to be like middle in terms of their ownership. That's what you're looking at from a cash build. Let's go over to the prize picks, see if they have the board up. They might not. Yeah, it might be a little early. Let me go ahead and refresh it. Let's make sure it's not on here. Unfortunately not, boys. So there's no prize picks board up. If you're looking for all of my analysis on that, I will be doing a write-up. So that'll be posted on the Patreon, much like all of the projections that are already up on Patreon that have my ownership and player pool on it. So I'll remind you guys, I'll share it, just show it to you once again. If you're looking for everything I have to offer, these sheets that we were going through, that's on the Patreon and the prize picks write-up later on. Again, if it was up, the board was up, I'll definitely go through it with you guys, but I'm not going to wait around here for half an hour to an hour for it. Sometimes they put it out right after lock. Sometimes it takes them like 2 hours. Sometimes I guess they get a little bit busy, right? They're human beings on a Saturday night. I understand it, but not convenient for us from the content side. Let's just say that. But that's all I've got for y'all. Best of luck with all of your lineups. Hopefully we can have yet another profitable slate. Like I said, we've been on a heater for quite some time. We've got that lineup in the top 20 of the GPP. Some live lineups from the Showdown, not Showdown, single entry perspective. I have plenty of them that are in the cash, a few of them that are just outside of the cash. If we have a big Sunday, we could obviously win that GPP, but also really bring home some ROI from the rest of our cards too. So I have a lot of high hopes here for Sunday. Hopefully it goes well. We know more often than not, you're probably not going to win the GPP, but it's better to have live shots at it, to have a little bit of a sweat on Sunday than to not, right? I mean, that's why we're here, right? To have fun with DFS and to hopefully think a GPP every once in a while. But amen. That's all I've got to say here for the live stream. And I'll catch you guys for next week and all of our content covering next week's golf tournament.